There we go. I think
Okay.
we are live now. Hi, Esther.
Hi,
How are you
Marcelo.
doing? Okay, so we're going to pretend we weren't just talking about 5 minutes ago. Um, Esther Lin, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Poetry Hour Notes from the Field, a monthly poetry reading series hosted by me, Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, YubaSutter Poet Laureate, and as well hosted under the auspices of the YubaSutter Regional Arts Council, with all the thanks to David Reed, Abby Cesena, and Shantae Arroyo, who is here doing our tech. So much love to them. I am honored today for the month of July to host and have Esther Lin, poet extraordinaire, with us today. Esther is going to be reading some poems with us, some new work, and we'll discuss some questions about writing, the writing life, poetry, and etc. So if you are either on Facebook Live, on Twitter, or wherever else platforms they have it on, you can comment and we can see your comments if you would like. And I will be fielding some questions. Yeah, so Esther Lin was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and lived in the US as an undocumented immigrant for 21 years. She was a 2020 writing fellow at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and a 2017-2019 Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. She is the author of Ghost Wife, winner of a Poetry Society of America Chapbook Prize, and winner of the Crab Orchard Review's 2018 Richard Peterson Prize. Her poems have appeared all over the place, or are forthcoming in places like Gulf Coast, Hyper Allergic, the New England Reviews, Pleiades, Plowshares, and many, many other places. You can check out her website to read some of her other work, as well as take a look at a link to purchase Ghostwife. Esther is a co-organizer, along with myself, of Undocumented Poets, which promotes the work of undocumented poets and raises consciousness about the structural barriers they face in the literary community. Thank you, Esther, so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure, such an honor, and I will let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you to the Yuba Suter Art Center and Shantae for making all of this possible. Um, I'm going to read some love poems. I've been going through a divorce in the last 2 years, and in realizing that I wrote poems about it and my childhood and my parents passing, how very much alike the poems are in tone, how loaded with love and pain they were, and how similar all that love is in function between one's partner and parents. My parents were my greatest lovers, and my husband was in some ways another parent. So I wrote that feeling this way during the year we were all sheltering in. I love reading fiction, so I have two introductory poems, one of my father and one of my mother. Um, and the one of my father refers to E.M. Forster's A Room with a View. This poem refers to a lot of the storyline in Room with a View. It's called A Room with a View. In a speech that runs over 3 pages, the hero declares his love, though she's to marry another man. Still, he does the right thing. He kisses her by the tennis court. The sun leaks into the hills behind his head. When she walks off, it is like father dying again. The hero left by the grass at nightfall, and he is barefoot. Being with, being like. In the last days, I wheeled him to the courtyard for the fountain and the bench, where he told me stories of my birth, and of my childhood. And I told him stories of his birth, his childhood. Because I had heard them, I was now their teller, and he held my hand. In the sweetness of loss, I forget my father. No English meant I raced from office to office, on bad days by subway, on fatter days by cab. I drafted letters and called customer service, translating, always translating. What am I supposed to ask for? Was my refrain when he held out a sheaf of bills. You're smart. You figure it out. Soon I ascertained work was how I prove my love. It would be the only way. Yet while my mother shouted, he treated me so tenderly. This next poem is about my mother, and I was reading Madame Bovary a year after she passed, and a wonderful novel, brilliant and painful novel, and I found a lot of cutting similarities between my mother's personality and some of Emma's, which I wrote about here. It's called Reading Madame Bovary. That afternoon, Bovary went to the apothecary's closet, fumbling for arsenic to draw out her black bile, make her mouth a hole. She waited hours for the worst of it, the shearing of her dark, lovely hair. Though for many years, my mother's hair was not lovely, but thin as sagebrush and autumn fire had passed over. There are mothers who demand a price, sex organs without cancer. She said, "You can't know how bad it is." Bovary's daughter worked in a satin mill. There is no talk of her beauty. To say my mother was not beautiful when she died is merciless. Today, I am without mercy. Diagnosis. After she died, people admitted something might have gone awry. Nerves, suggested one doctor. Narcissism, another. Over lunch, a cousin proposed, "Your mother had a difficult personality." All true, and didn't matter. She nourished us by nourishing us. She wrapped dumplings of crystal shrimp, sliced heavy eggplants, and fish, always one fish gleaming among the meats and greens. I hardly ate. It was too rich, too much of everything, which annoyed her. "Why won't you accept what I offer?" she said. "I work so hard. Why? Why?" When my husband tells me he loves me, I hear her instead. And then I wrote some childhood poems about when we first came to the United States. When we came to the United States, I was 4, and we came in December, which in Brazil was the summer, and up here in the Northern Hemisphere, it was winter, and we arrived in New York City, and it was very cold and very snowy. So I wrote a little bit about our first experiences with snow from within the family view. So this is called First Snow. My mother bought us matching maroon coats for the event. New to such clothes, I zipped right into the wool of my scarf. Last child out. The hedge held me like a box. It would burst brilliant pink one day, my first flowers in the northern hemisphere. Today it stood puffy with something limp and indolent, the way it lay across the stems. With a bare finger, I poked and poked, while beyond my sister and brother shrieked, trying to build the snowman they knew was expected of them. It was mostly mud. Even though snow fell everywhere, the pavement, the cars, my mother's hair, the beautiful country. That's what the Chinese call America. We must have appeared odd. 3 children in identical coats, looking around in disbelief. Rhododendrons appear in all the early photos. My arms belted around my mother, only the top of my head seen because she has spoken sharply and now resorts to begging. Your father hasn't seen you in 8 weeks. Smile, smile. I am too sad or sick to obey. And she makes that sound, tap, between her teeth that signals the end of a unit of patience. I release her and dash off. What follows is probably hell. I don't remember anymore. Only after, dawdling along the hedge, touching the little flaring flowers. There are so many that as I run my hand along, I meet more, nothing else. The top of my head is hot from sun. I understand I am 2 girls, the one my mother wants and the one who lives only among her kind. So we were undocumented, and in addition to this, my mother was quite religious, and she was, I don't know, she was an evangelical Christian who also had a bent on the apocalypse. So she told us a lot of stories about hellfire and brimstone, and as a child, I would get the devils and the sins of Christianity confused with the other more concrete fears in our lives, which was deportation. So I tried to write about that a little bit, first as a child and then in the following poem as an adult. This one is called Absence and Solitude. The prophet did not need to tell me I could be snatched by forces of darkness. I knew I could be deported. But he said my soul, as well as my body, could suffer. What did I fear more? A man clawing his way along my rug, offering me what I love best. Or the man at the door asking quietly my name, my date of birth. Season of cherries. First the pink ones with yellow lights, then the silky dark ones, sweeter, nearly cloying as you and I eat and eat until the bag folds over. My first knowledge was, tell no one. This is love among the undocumented. Tell no one. When I met you, even you, I wondered, would you do it? In the courtyard, the dust rises. Soon there will be peaches, plums. I'm ready for them all. My mother says, well, what did you expect? Deportation is deportation. Heartbreak is heartbreak. They shouldn't be the same to us. No rain, it turns out. You and I sleep a while, make love before the moon sets. The shadows of each eyelash dive like swifts down your cheek. Attention to detail is a survivor's trait. Will you marry me is one question. Will you report me is the other. And I'm going to close on two poems that take place when I was spent a year in Provincetown, Massachusetts. That was a really beautiful and strange year because it was the most nature-filled year of my life and also one of the loneliest. Still life. Autumn. The curtains are polyester gauze. All the furniture is borrowed. Most of us do not know what winter on the Cape is like. We light candles to celebrate the darkness we are sure will envelop us like our mothers. We go around the room naming the art we would choose if we could choose. Someone says, an arranger of flowers, each morning making the lovely more lovely. Because he is a man, he can say this. Autumn passes. Each of us falls ill, and because we are not so young, we improve slowly. And this is my last poem, written to my dear friend Hannah, who used to play her violin for me in Provincetown. The Bach Hope. Oh, and I should say what the Bach Hope is, which she explained to me that in all of Bach's darkness and pessimism, that his music would sometimes or often end on a note of brightness and cheer, which scholars or critics, I think, call the Bach Hope. I listened for it in the partita, then in my favorite concerto. The practitioner sets down her violin. So unexpected, that move of his. We kneel in an emptied studio, wrinkled scores spread on the floor, the ceiling rising to our last evening in Provincetown. Tomorrow, the dog at the door whining. We are ruled by absence. Lonelier than that, the absence to come. Tomorrow, I fly as far as I can from my ex-husband to sleep in a basement. The practitioner is to lie down in the eye of the pandemic, and we will be the two of us without each other. We have all our lives labored for love and succor, and as it's turned out, all our lives poorly. For now we coo the dog, throw open the windows, this air of sea and lilac. The instrument resumes its place under her chin. Again we listen for his volta, his expectation, despite all evidence contrary, for something else. Thank you.
Yay, clap, 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 clap. Beautiful, beautiful words. Thank you so much for sharing. Says James, a beautiful poem. Says Anthony. Thank you, Esther, so much for your time, for your words, and just for beautiful poems and poems that I've read before, poems that I haven't, new poems, all alike. That was beautiful, and I guess I want to take it from there. I mean, taking it from the poems themselves and how I guess you really solidify from a single moment, or like pull from a single moment. I mean, you talked about like pulling that poem, the last poem about that begins with, you say, the Bach Hope, and deriving kind of the stuff of this world from that very abstract moment and kind of imbuing it with very solid things or very solid images. I see you as a very imagistic poet. Has that kind of been what you're familiar with, is beginning with an idea and then kind of finding ways in which your life revolves around that, or ways in which moments, events, people in your life can relate to that, or have something worth commenting on in relation to that?
Oh, that's such a hard question, Marcelo. I think as
I guess to
lately,
start,
go
sorry.
ahead.
To like change up the question, I would say, like, where did the poem start? Does it start with like that like abstract idea, or does it start with like more solid, like things of your world, things of your life?
Oh, I invited a lot of my students, former students, to attend this reading. I don't know if they're here. And I always say to start with, what's real, and to start with the body.
Mm,
But there are, of course, the ideas that are so beautiful, and that you also have the benefit of experiencing, especially if it's music, in this case, that I sit with the idea and I think, oh, I'm going to write about this idea, and then I try to wait for it. Then, like, I have the idea, I have a title, and then I just try to sit with it and try to be patient with it until the moment in which something bodily does arise, and I can then write about it from there. But it's true. Sometimes the idea comes out, and very often it can be an idea that just comes out, and when that happens, I try to be as patient as I can with it, because it's harder for me anyway to charge forward with an abstraction,
mhm.
but to kind of try to be as patient as I can for the image or the sensation to accompany that idea.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that does take a lot of patience as a poet, to know when not to rush things, when something it's you're in the right state of mind to allow yourself to receive the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, that really takes a lot of time and a lot of years of practice to have that kind of discipline. I was having a conversation with a friend, and we are talking about, like, why why do we have to like put ourselves through the ringer so much as poets? And so I had mentioned that something I'm working on don't really involve myself, and so um, not thinking of the self, that the self doesn't have to be, what is it, the necessary vehicle in a poem. But as you were saying right now, like, even if it starts with an idea, or even if it starts with like a tangible thing, um, you were saying, like, start with what's real, start with the body. Do you feel like it has to at least make a detour through the body, and then I guess, in its way out, are you like learning about yourself? Um, Let me rephrase that, because that was very. I taught a class just recently about, like, writing about other people in our lives, and a lot of people were
Mm.
writing about, like, their parents and the difficult relationships that we've had with our parents, and how we write them, and how does our relation to who we write about affect what it is that we write about. So I guess at the very heart of it, that has to do with, like, objectivity and distance. But yeah, maybe some thoughts on how how you think your relationship with the people that you speak about, I guess, uh, uh, determines how you speak about them.
I think when you're very close to the people you write about, especially the mythical figures our parents can be,
Hmm.
in some ways we do have to push away, and make them small, almost like making them Lego pieces, and little building blocks so that one isn't so taken by their grandeur. And that kind of distance is helpful. And in that effect, sometimes it's the ideas and the abstraction that allows them to shrink in your mind. And in that way, they do become approachable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think many of these poems I wrote in the last year, in a year in which we couldn't really go out and experience things with our bodies, in which we were gloved and masked and encased in plastic, we had very few resources to go to except in our mind and into the world of ideas. I was just having a conversation earlier today about how I love engaging in the world of imagination and in ideas and in feelings. And I don't really love talking about what's real. I don't really, my favorite conversations are about ideas and feelings, and text, art, rather than home renovation projects and, gardening, the ways that people have genuinely been keeping themselves sustained. I've been sustaining myself by eating what feels very ethereal. So I think many of these poems do have an abstract quality to them um, because in thinking, there was just so much cogitating and thinking through and trying to disentangle myself as a daughter and see myself as a figure in a poem instead. Whether that's good or not, I'm not really sure. Uh, but yeah. And maybe I'm self-conscious right now because I did invite some students to come to this reading, in which I say, we're writing through our bodies, we're writing through our senses. And the rules are, of course, meant to be broken, right? We're going to, and then veer off and go into ideas and arguments and the things that make the laws in our land and the things that make the laws in our hearts.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's great. I love that. And write about into someone knowable, like you say, like turning them into a Lego, so that I guess we're writing from the outside in, like observations, rather than trying write our way out of them. There's a different perspective if you're writing from within like the framework of your mother's daughter than from the framework of your anyways. I feel like it's different, like you say, reducing not necessarily to like a caricature, because we want to make sure that we complicate their lives, and we resist turning trying to give people dimensionality. I always tell my students that about like vertical depth to people, to their characters. I know it's weird to call people in poems characters, but vertical depth to their characters through images and all of that. And so like at the end of the day, for me, this pandemic was difficult to. It's interesting to hear that you really relished in speaking more about ideas, more than like gardening, more than like the 5 inches of like my grass that is overdue to cut right in front of me. um when there was when everything felt like ethereal, when time seemed irrelevant, um I was just talking with a friend, I wanted to engage in like the real, because like you said, we weren't touching our family, we weren't touching people, we were isolated. But I couldn't bring myself to engage with like the very real. Like I told a friend of mine, I haven't been able to watch a drama like just
Yes,
like
me too.
like down to earth, just drama, like your like capital D drama.
Mm,
Um, I can't bring myself to do that, so I've been living in like zombie apocalypse movies,
me too.
in science fiction and all of that. And I don't know, when the poems that I'm writing right now are very uh, scant, if that's the word,
Mm,
sparse
mm,
of like figurative language.
mm.
Very, it's the opposite of what I'm like watching. They're not abstract things. They're not abstract ideas. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if you can engage with like the very real in like popular culture right now, versus like how you approach your poems. Have you been feeling like that as well, given like the pandemic, just our isolation?
I think escapism has been a huge part of the our media consumption right now too. I've been rewatching The Walking Dead, for instance, because something feels really cathartic about it, and I haven't been. I couldn't watch anything that was genuinely serious,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I feel that. So, since we are speaking about, I have already mentioned my divorce. Something that my ex-husband had said that really struck me was when we would compare notes on our childhood. He would talk about his childhood neighborhood, his childhood baseball field, and all these like physical concrete activities that he did that all sounded really lovely and idyllic to me. And the stories that I had to offer up were memories of reading when I was a child. Reading some of, the first time I read Greek mythology, and I was energized by it. Learning to read with Little House on the Prairie, or Encyclopedia Brown. I don't know if you read those when you were a kid, but that a lot of my experiences of delight when I was a child were literary, childish literary, but still literary, and because it was a slightly grimmer childhood. There weren't that many delights in the physical world for me, especially growing up in a bit of a concrete, part of the city. Um, and that what brought me delight were things of the imagination, and and the same is, I feel that when in the last few years, as a society, we've been given permission to return to the childhood delights. We've been allowed to return to investigate ourselves really closely. A lot of people have been taking poetry classes because they're given an opportunity now to study poetry in a deep way that they didn't allow themselves to until this past year. And maybe for some it means gardening, and for others it means just romping in our imagination, going into space. I would love to write some space poems.
Well, we'd be ready to hear them. Yeah, I mean, I think it is escapism. It is, not being able. I mean, for me, it's not being able to handle like some of the very big, and I think the more serious shows, I think, just hit too close to home. Um,
Yeah. Can you tell me about the spareness of your poems?
oh yeah, I mean, I was just working on one today, and I feel like, and I've had this poem with our mutual friend, I've had this conversation with our mutual friend Janine, um, in the fact that since the 2016 election that I have written has, I felt like I didn't have the luxury misunderstood, that figurative language was a luxury I no longer had, that I needed to plain forward as possible. Because aestheticizing tragedy.
Oh, Marcelo, you're breaking up a little bit.
Just cut off. I think we were just cut off for a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for some reason,
oh, sorry. Can you go back? Can you go back a bit? You were talking about how figurative language seemed to aestheticize something, that it was
yeah. I mean, I'm all here
luxury.
for like beautiful language. I'm all here for luxuriousness. I'm all here for figurative metaphors on top of metaphors on top of metaphors, and just allowing what language does in the readings that I have. But for the same reason that when I was writing like my first books in Sontle, I could not bring myself to write about certain things in a very straightforward manner. Things have kind of reversed because of the election, because of the just the political climate, especially for immigrant communities. That the poems that came out of that experience were very sparse extractions of figurative language. And you have to use tools in your tool belt as a poet on that. And it's it's like the situational nature of presenting that kind of have to push the things for rather than you're like flexing. So like I was just being I'm working on that are around like on the prison, like they're
Oh, well, I'm just going to chime in while Marcelo maybe gets his connection going. I think we missed quite a bit of what you said, Marcelo.
oh no.
I'm not sure.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know where it cut off, but I was talking about like the situational drama of events is what has led me right now. Like I just found out about this tree that I took a picture of as I was doing like this walk around Folsom Prison, which is like the famous prison that Johnny Cash came to in Folsom Prison Blues, and that's like half an hour from here. And so I wanted to know what kind of trees and shrubs were around there, and around Folsom did this like curated, manicured Johnny Cash trail around the prison, and it's very.
Oh, I think we've lost Marcelo again. I'm just going to, I guess I'll just talk about figurative language a little bit and its luxuries, and then maybe Marcelo can come back and fill us in later. And that I think poets, we often like to talk about how we should delight and luxuriate in the what figurative language affords us, in the way that even more so than fiction writers, we're given liberties to write imaginatively, fitfully, wildly, with total abandon, using figurative language as extravagantly as we can. And okay, Marcel's going to be coming back in a bit. And there's also, on the other hand, a kind of rhetoric about there's the other side of the argument where poetry should be very plain spoken, should speak plainly. should name events, should say what happened. Not that the two can't coincide, but lately I've been realizing how difficult it is to speak very plainly in a poem, and for it to still be a poem. Um, that I have lately been admiring poems that are capable of speaking what happens, not in a literal way, but in a way that's fresh and new. Hi, Marcella. I'm just kind of riffing about the distinction between using figurative language and being very plain spoken about what happens, and how difficult it can be to say what happens while staying within the parameters of the form of a poem. Um, and that saying what happens can sometimes be incredibly boring. Sometimes what happens is you went to the supermarket, you dropped some eggs, and that was your day. So how is it that you can say what happens and still, for it to still be brought to life as a poem without using the luxuries of figurative language? And lately, I feel very similarly to you in that I've been drawn to the plain spokenness of saying what happened. The thing is that something happens. There's a twisting or a change that takes place when saying what happens becomes really dangerous. And I have not quite yet figured out what it is exactly that transformation take place. And to utilize the metaphor and the figuration more judiciously. I don't know if you could hear me.
Yeah. I'm sorry I cut off. I just turned off like all my Wi-Fi, and actually I'm gonna turn it off on my phone too.
Oh, okay.
But I think taking the things of our personal lives, and then somehow turning them into the thing of poetry. I think this is the first time that I think I have lived my poems. Like they were so outside of, like, they were so removed. I think I was trying to make them very, very close to my emotional center, but they weren't close to my lived center. And so as I was saying, like I'm taking on projects where, like, I walk around the Folsom prison and reading about examples of, like, this tree called the Judas Tree, and like the history of the Judas Tree, which I think I cut off after that point.
Yeah.
Or as I was talking about that, where, like, stumbling across this tree that I actually saw, and then reading about why it's called that. It was the tree that Judas hung himself after betraying Jesus, and then it no longer grew big and strong because in the shame of being involved in the role of that. So it grew small from that point on, so it wouldn't support a body.
That's a great story. I've never heard of the Judas Tree before.
Right, and I didn't either. And so, I downloaded this app that it would just tell me what kind of plants I'm looking at and take a picture of them. And so I feel like I'm really living my poems in a way that I had never done before. I guess my poems were always towards, like, my reader. How would my reader read this? And now I'm really just curious and finding out different things, different little tidbits here and there, about, like, how algorithms are being made to assess flight risks for inmates and for detainees, and using the algorithm to determine whether somebody gets bail or not, how much that bail is set, or if their likelihood of being of becoming a reoffender or something like that. So I mean, it's
Oh, I've lost Marcelo again. Oh dear. Oh dear. I think Marcel hasn't had these kinds of issues with connection before. And he was in the middle of saying something fascinating. Oh, what can I do?
Um,
Oh,
it keeps
hello.
it keeps cutting us off. I don't know why. It's never happened on StreamYard. It's my it's happening on your end, then it's probably all of us. um, yeah, sorry out there, everybody, for the shaky. Um, yeah, no, I'm the only one on Wi-Fi now. I don't want to move, but I think I'll move just for the benefit of being closer to the Wi-Fi. Hold on one second.
Sounds good.
Let me unplug here. Bear with me, everybody. Thank you for understanding the trials and tribulations of Zoom.
Sure.
But I guess now you can at least see my plants now that I'm closer.
Peace Lily.
Yes, indeed. But now I'm not as bright. Now I'm very... Okay. Yeah, I'm not as bright anymore because I'm facing... Okay. Oh, wait. The things we do. I think this is better. And I am literally right next to my router.
Okay, great. Thanks,
That should
Marcelo.
help. And of course, my dog is here. That's the one thing I love about Zoom is that I get to see everybody's dogs and cats. So if you have a dog or cat, they are welcome.
I wish. I wish I had a doggy or a kitty. I would love to have a kitty at some point.
Cool. So, I mean, yeah, I think we're both just trying to get at the same point, is that it's been really difficult. It's been really difficult to be a poet and try to make sense of the things that are around us through poetry. You know, I don't know if you had mentioned, like, what is an art that we could choose if we could choose, and somebody said somebody said flower
Arranging
arrangement.
flowers, yes.
And they could say that because they were a man. You know, I guess we're poets and we make sense of what is happening right now through poetry, but maybe not necessarily. Like, is there something else that you have either been thinking about making sense of of what we're going through recently, or have given thought to that? Maybe in fiction, maybe in sculpture.
Oh, that would be wonderful if I had a talent for sculpture or anything visual. I think all poets want to be painters or sculptors, is how it goes. I've certainly, I know that you've been really fascinated in nonfiction lately, Marcelo, and I've been always interested in fiction, and I'm realizing per our conversation how weird it is. I have a lot of poems about novels, so it's a piece of imagination on another, in regards to another piece of imagination. But for me, the novels are as real as anything in the world, so why not? And I don't know. When I think about being able to convey what I wish to convey through fiction, through a novel, which I would like to do, for me, the novel operates on a more grand scale metaphor. I do think of novels as being like just a bigger and possibly more elaborate and more consistent form of metaphor, so that the, like, Anna Karenina, for instance, is one enormous metaphor that's been very carefully calibrated and engineered by Tolstoy, whereas a poem can weave in and out of metaphor more easily, and probably in a messier and less structured way.
I caught like 90%, 99% of that. So I did catch the majority of that about the novel just being a much larger, much larger metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like a poem. You can kind of push, like, if we're talking about like architecture, a poem could be pushed together with some like well-placed twigs and leaves, and that would make a lovely poem. In order to write a novel, though, in order to create that entire landscape of characters, family, drama, you need an architect, you need a construction manager, you need a scaffold, you need a foundation built. All of it has to be in service to that metaphor. Whereas in the poem, you can kind of move in and out. And it actually made me think of, do you remember when our friend Javier Zamora said, years back, he said that he wrote a book of poems first because poems were quicker. I remember at the time really being puzzled by that. Like, how can poems be quicker? I labor over my poems, but he was right. He was right. You can make a poem just, sometimes with a little luck, and then with very slender tools.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you been thinking about that with nonfiction or fiction too?
Oh God, I could not approach fiction anytime soon. Though I have promised some people, I was like, hold me accountable, and let me give you a draft of something by like December. That ain't gonna happen. No, that's not gonna happen. But it's I can dream. I don't think I'm ready to approach like the world in a novel. Like nonfiction, I think was enough of the right hand margin for me, and enough expository writing. I think I was much more comfortable in the essay. I think for me, the essay is like a vehicle of exploration that doesn't require me to speak it through the voice of somebody else or through even like a narrator. And yeah, maybe I'm just afraid of like going outside of myself, because even like the memoir, is very much me. It's very much close to myself, very close to my, and I guess I'm part of the reason why I teach some of the things that I teach is because I have no idea. I want to know more about them. So the engagement with my students, it's like, okay, so now what you really don't know is that you're really actually just like teaching me how to like do all of this, because I'm just like working through a lot of those problems myself. So one of them, was how do I just step outside of myself? And how do I avoid, always using myself as the vehicle of creative expression? And I don't know if I'm ready to do that with the novel, with how much distance or how much you have to be into the mind of somebody else. I forget who said this about like Toni Morrison's characters, and they said that's not Toni Morrison speaking. And I guess it's true of any like novelist. Is like that's not necessarily them speaking, it's them living the lives of their characters, and they might not necessarily agree with what their characters are saying, but the fact that they are embodying that like gives their characters that much more of a compelling life, rather than always being the always being like a simulacra or a substitute of the author. And I feel like that's all I would be able to produce right now. Is a simulacra of me and my thoughts and my ideas. I don't know what it would take to be willing to step outside of that and invest it into like a character that can then challenge me, like myself, and challenge my ideas, challenge my perspectives and all of that. And so once I can do that, then I think I'd be ready to write a novel. But right now I'm very close to like myself, and I can't step away from that.
It's interesting how both sides can tend to be pathologized. If you can't step outside of yourself, it's a problem. If it's too easy for you to step outside of yourself and you don't want to stay with yourself, that too is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the point that I made in this previous like workshop that I taught was in writing within another or about another, like, are we then turning the lens back on ourselves? And so we did a lot of discussion about that, about how that can be the case, that we write about other people, yes, to write about them, to know about them, to empathize with them, but also the lens is also being pointed back at us as a way of like speaking about ourselves without necessarily having to speak about ourselves. So yeah, I mean that's all really interesting. Go ahead.
Can I read one last poem?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, okay, because I actually have a poem that is about reading. This is kind of the perfect segue for it. That in my mom's religiousness, she didn't let me read fantasy books, the very thing that's sustaining us now, about dragons, because dragons were of the devil. So I wrote about like the experience of reading, even though she was a great reader herself. So I'll just this poem's called A Book About Dragons. I could not tell my mother that the most beautiful phrase I'd read was in a book about dragons. To say this word invoked a slap or search and seizure of one's closet, bed, or soul. A princess and a traitor, my dragon was exiled. Her home was called the Green Darkness. Like the dragon, I longed for the green darkness, not for the green or the dark, but the conundrum of its name. A spirit so rich it must occupy two bodies. This I perceived as the deep, attending silence of books, the book and me. I heard it later, with Jane as she walked past Thornfield, and in Combray. By then, my mother was dead, and I could not tell her about the wonderful things I'd read. And that was the tribute I wrote to childhood reading, and what a salvation it was, child and adult. Hi, Marcelo.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I kept doing that.
It's okay.
Esther, I couldn't imagine ending anywhere else other than the Green Darkness, and about dragons. I'm gonna go back and rewatch Game of Thrones.
Except for the last two seasons.
Except for the last two seasons. It's been such a pleasure having you and talking with you, hearing your poems, talking craft, talking work, and so many other things. So thank you. It's truly a pleasure and honor. And I look forward to hearing more of these poems in the future. Please, if you can, check out Esther's website, where you can see some of her other work, other poems, and her book, Ghost Wife, winner of the Poetry Society of America award. Yeah, so again, Esther, I can't say enough, and my praises just do not suffice. So thank you, and I will just clap for everybody.
Thank you, Marcelo. Here. Thank you, Yuba.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.